Welcome to Storytelling Basics, Part 1. Stories can be powerful. As a communication tool, they help your audience remember details and absorb important points. For example, I could tell you the popular game Monopoly was invented in 1904 by Lizzie J. Magie, but you're more likely to remember this nugget of information if I present it as a story. Lizzie J. Magie received a patent for a board game in January 1904. She called it the Landlord's Game. It is very similar to the Monopoly game we know today, except instead of names like Park Place and Marvin Gardens, it has Poverty Place and Easy Street. She meant her game to illustrate how real estate allows a few privileged landlords to profit unfairly over their tenants. Since making money on the game wasn't her motive, she allowed it to be copied and shared from friend to friend, and it became a popular pastime. After learning to play the game with fellow enthusiasts, a few people over the years made small variations and marketed their own versions of the Landlord's Game. In 1935, Parker Brothers signed a deal with Charles Darrow for his version, Monopoly, which celebrated the landlords and featured streets from Atlantic City instead of focusing on the plight of the renters. Darrow received royalties for each game Parker Brothers sold and became known as the first millionaire game designer, even though the game was actually designed by a woman 30 years prior. Magie eventually got a deal from Parker Brothers as well, but never received royalties for the Landlord's Game, and modern critics believe Parker Brothers bought her game just to protect their monopoly intellectual property. So, this story has a hero, also known as a protagonist. We can easily identify with her, Lizzie J. Magie. It also has villains, also known as antagonists, Charles Darrow and Parker Brothers. It even has a delicious caramel center of irony as Magie gets an unfair deal so similar to the ones she criticized in her game design. Conveying the information as a story makes it memorable, important, and relevant. It also gets our emotions involved. We feel sympathy for Magie. We feel cheated by Parker Brothers. And we also feel anticipation. As we read the story, we are compelled to find out what happens next. We want to know how it ends. These same qualities of story are useful for games. You want players emotionally invested in the hero, the player character they see on the screen, so they will play the game as it's intended, trying not to get killed, fighting the good fight, etc. Otherwise, they use your game like a toy and have fun by running the player character into death pits and ignoring the damsel in distress they just don't care about, but you and your team spend hours creating. You also want them moving forward through the game, invested in getting to the next level or the next boss fight or the next area. You want them to feel that pull, so they come back to the game and feel rewarded for sticking with it through to the end. So, there are two processes we can use to make good stories. One is called structure. There are lots of different theories about the structure of a story, but I prefer one that's called Freytag's Pyramid, because it breaks the story down into a good number of pieces. This is the structure I want you to learn and use. It fits very well with game development. The other process is called pacing. A lot of times we can identify something with good pacing or bad pacing, but we have a hard time explaining how to do good pacing. The Japanese, though, have a word for it. Jo-ha-kyu refers to a slow, quiet beginning of Jo, a middle that gradually grows in complexity and speeds up, ha, and a quick, exciting finish, kyu, followed by a quiet moment similar to that in the beginning. First, let's talk about structure and Freytag's triangle. It has 5 parts. Exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and denouement. That's a French word, that's how you pronounce that word there at the end, denouement. So, exposition is the part of the story where you explain things. This is where you introduce all the important characters and setting and generally get ready for things to start happening in your story. The key word for rising action is action. This is where things start happening. If action is taking place, if things are going somewhere, physically or metaphorically, then this is part of the rising or falling action. The difference between the two is whether the climax has occurred yet or not, which direction the action is trending in, more and more exciting, or less and less so. The climax comes between the rising and falling action. It is the one point in the story that is most exhilarating, the most exciting moment in the entire story. The falling action is any little action that is required to pick up the pieces and put things away. It's usually very short. The denouement is the state of rest at the end where all action has stopped. A quiet moment occurs where it can be said that they live happily or unhappily ever after. It comes right before the words, "the end." So let's look at this a little more carefully. One way is to think of it as a metaphor of a sandcastle. You start out looking around at the beautiful sunny beach, the sky, the sand, the shorebirds, the seashells, the waves. This is all exposition. It's slow, it builds very slowly, gradually, just taking in the scenery. Then you start scooping up the sand and shaping it into a sandcastle, and this is the rising action. You make the little walls, you make the center part, you make the little, It starts happening faster, things start moving. This is the rising action. The castle rises up out of the sand. So what do you do once it's finally built? Well, you stop and admire your handiwork. Then the most exciting, most thrilling moment in the whole story is that you stomp it into oblivion, right? That's what you do at the end of the sandcastle building. Half the fun is destroying it. So, this is the climax moment. And then we have a little falling action where you watch the waves wash it into the sea. But not a lot's going on here, just watching the waves wash the rubble away. And then you have a very short denouement where you contemplate the temporary nature of all things. Okay? I hope this helps you remember the different parts and what they're all about for Freytag's Pyramid. This is the end of part 1. For a look at pacing and other important storytelling tools, don't miss part 2.